The wind scraped across the open prairie like a rasp against bone, dry and relentless. It carried dust and the faint scent of burnt wood, stirring ash that clung to the remains of Callista Whitlock's cabin. Where once laughter had echoed against warm pine walls, only ruin remained, charred boards, shattered glass, and the blackened skeleton of a home built on hope. Callista stood at the edge of what used to be her porch, boots sunk into the brittle earth. Her shawl flapped behind her like a banner of defiance. She hadn't cried when the fire came. Not when she buried James in a shallow grave beneath the birch tree they'd planted together. Not when the sheriff told her the cause was, probably a stray ember from the stove, though he never met her eyes when he said it. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, Callista had learned how to split wood with a fractured wrist and how to cook beans without a pot. She'd learned how to ignore the pitying looks of women in town and the leering ones of the men. Most days, she didn't speak to anyone, and no one spoke to her. But this morning, something felt wrong. The wind was too quiet. The birds too still. Even the crows, which usually circled her chimney for scraps, had vanished. She hitched her mule, Betsy, and headed deeper into the woods, farther than she normally dared. There were rumors of coyotes and worse things beyond the ridge, two-legged predators that didn't leave tracks. Callista had never paid much attention to rumors, but today she brought her rifle. Dead branches cracked beneath her boot. The woods here were denser, older. The trees leaned in close, as if to share secrets. Her breath steamed in the cold morning air as she pressed through the underbrush, eyes sharp, ears sharper. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint it might have been imagined. A muffled cry, somewhere between a moan and a whimper. Her body stilled. It came again, closer this time. Definitely human. Callista crouched and crept toward the sound, weaving between tree trunks and stepping over a crumbling stone wall swallowed by moss. Her heart hammered. She hadn't heard another soul speak in days, and now someone was crying? She broke into a clearing and stopped dead. At the base of an old cottonwood tree, 2 boys were chained. Twin boys, maybe 13 or 14, dirty, bruised, and barefoot. One lay slumped over, unconscious or dead. The other sat upright, his back against the trunk, steel shackles around his wrists. His face was streaked with dried blood, and his eyes, wild, blue, defiant, locked onto hers. "Don't touch us," he rasped, voice cracking like brittle parchment. "They'll come back." Callista stepped forward slowly. "Who did this to you?" The boy didn't answer. Just stared. The other boy groaned and shifted, barely breathing. She dropped her rifle and knelt beside them, inspecting the chains. They were rusted but thick, looped cruelly around the tree and cinched tight with iron locks. Old cattle restraints, maybe. Callista didn't ask questions. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her husband's hatchet, the only thing the fire hadn't claimed. "Don't move," she whispered. The metal rang out as she struck it. Once, twice. On the third swing, the lock snapped free. The boy flinched but didn't cry out. She moved to the second boy, gently prying his hands apart. His wrists were rubbed raw and bleeding. She slid her shawl off and tore it into strips, wrapping the wounds tight. "You're safe now," she said. "No one's safe," the first boy muttered. "You don't know what they did." Callista ignored him and hoisted the unconscious boy into her arms. He was thin as a fence post and light from hunger. The other boy struggled to stand and nearly collapsed. She caught him. "Can you walk?" He nodded, lips pressed into a stubborn line. Callista didn't ask anything else. Not yet. By the time they reached her wagon, both boys were shaking from cold and exhaustion. She covered them with a tattered quilt and gave them water from her flask. They drank like animals, desperate and afraid. "Name's Callista," she said, settling beside them with the reins. "We'll get you warm, get you fed. Then we'll talk." The boy who could speak hesitated, then finally said, "Levi." "That's Elias." He nodded toward the unconscious one. "We didn't mean to cause trouble." Callista gave a dry laugh. "Trouble tends to find its way here, whether it's wanted or not." She urged the mule forward, glancing behind them every so often. The woods seemed too still now. Like something was watching. Or waiting. Back at the remains of her homestead, Callista led them to what used to be the barn, half burnt but still standing. Inside, she'd carved out a corner with dry straw, blankets, and an old stove she'd salvaged. Not much, but better than chains and cold dirt. She laid Elias down gently and covered him. Levi refused to sit until she handed him a tin cup of hot broth. He drank in silence, eyes never leaving the door. Only once the sun dipped below the hills did he speak again. They kept us in the cellar. Said we were property. When we ran, they didn't chase us. Just left us out there. Said the forest would finish the job. Callista crouched beside the fire, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. Who's they? Levi didn't answer. She didn't press. Instead, she asked something else. How long were you chained there? He hesitated. 3 days. Maybe 4. No one came looking? His jaw tightened. No one ever looks for us. Callista turned the spoon in her hands. She knew what it was to feel abandoned. To scream and have the world pretend it didn't hear. But this wasn't just heartbreak. This was something darker. Crueler. Elias stirred and coughed. Levi scrambled over, touching his brother's face, murmuring reassurances too quiet for Callista to hear. She watched them a moment, then stood. I'll need to go into town tomorrow. Get supplies. You'll both be safe here. Levi looked up sharply. You don't understand. If they find out we're alive. They won't, Callista interrupted, her voice hard as flint. He blinked, surprised by her certainty. She didn't explain it. She couldn't. Something had shifted inside her the moment she saw those boys. A fire that the blaze hadn't managed to kill. She'd lost her husband, her home, and nearly herself, but she hadn't lost her spine. Later that night, Callista sat outside with her rifle across her lap. The stars above blinked cold and distant. She stared at the horizon, where the trees met the sky, and waited. Behind her, the boys slept, breath shallow but steady. And out beyond the ridge, in the direction they'd come from, a figure on horseback paused beneath the moonlight. Just watching. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the dirt. Callista's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Her eyes didn't blink. Not once. She had no answers yet, only questions. But she knew this much. Whoever had chained those boys had made a mistake. They'd left them alive. And Callista Whitlock had nothing left to lose. The fire in the stove crackled low, casting long shadows across the barn's interior. Callista watched the flickering glow crawl up the wooden beams, listening to the storm whisper against the roof. Outside, wind howled like a wolf with its snout pressed to the door. Inside, the two boys slept with their backs to the wall, curled into themselves like animals too long in the wild. Levi hadn't said much after that first night. Callista understood why. Words, when they did come, felt like stepping into a pit with a blindfold, dangerous, uncertain. She didn't push. She offered warmth, food, and silence. The kind that didn't ask questions. Elias was slower to wake. He stirred often with a fevered moan, trapped in dreams where no one could reach him. His wrist was badly infected, despite the herbs Callista had boiled down to salve. She needed real medicine. Powder gauze. Maybe laudanum. And she'd have to go into town to get them. At dawn, Callista saddled the mule. Levi sat hunched on a hay bale, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You'll stay here, she said, tying the last knot. Keep the door barred. Don't light the stove till sundown. Levi nodded, though tension rippled through him like a stretched wire. If they come back. Callista's gaze was flint. They won't. He tried to believe her. She could see that in the way his hands clenched, as though strength could be summoned by will alone. Callista admired that. But strength, she knew, came from pain, and these boys had known plenty. The ride into town was quiet, but not peaceful. The prairie felt colder, sharper. Trees leaned away as if in fear. By the time she hit Main Street, her shoulders were tight, jaw set. Cedar Hollow was a town with one church, 2 saloons, and more rumors than cattle. It had been kind once, back when James was alive. Back when people remembered Callista as a schoolteacher and not the burnt-out widow with a curse on her name. Now, eyes followed her down the road like crows watching a wounded thing. She stopped at Moore's General Store. The bell above the door jangled sharply. "Callista," said Tom Moore, barely lifting his head. His voice was wary, polite. "Need salve. Linens. Laudanum if you've got it." Tom hesitated. "Trouble. Just burns," she lied. Tom fetched the supplies with the sluggishness of a man weighing every move. Callista could feel the question bubbling under his breath. Who's she helping? She didn't offer answers. Instead, she slid the coins across the counter. Blood money, earned from selling James's last rifle. She took her goods and left without another word. But as she passed the saloon, voices carried through the open door. "Left him to rot, I heard. Better that way. Should have finished the job." Callista slowed. A familiar voice cut through the rest like a knife, low, smooth, practiced. "Lord protects the just," said Sheriff Anders, "and punishes the rest. All in due time." She turned slightly and met his eyes through the doorway. He stood inside, one boot propped on the brass rail, arms folded. A small smile played at the edge of his mouth. The kind that didn't reach the eyes. Anders tipped his hat, mockingly. Callista nodded, then walked on. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she was halfway home. Levi was waiting at the gate when she returned. He hadn't touched the food she left, but Elias was sitting up, pale and sweat-soaked but alert. Callista washed the wound, applied the salve, and tucked the blanket tighter around him. Elias mumbled a thank you. Callista almost didn't hear it over the wind. That night, she set an extra trap line and hung tin cups from a string around the barn entrance. If anything moved, she'd know. Sleep didn't come. Neither did the enemy. Not yet. 2 days passed before Levi opened up again. He stood outside at sunrise, sharpening a stick to a point, eyes scanning the horizon. Callista poured coffee into a tin mug and handed it to him. He accepted it with both hands, grateful but hesitant. "I know what people think," he said quietly. "That we're cursed. That we brought it on ourselves." "I don't care what people think," Callista replied. He sipped and looked down at the ground, then back up at her. "There's a man," he said. "Silas Morrow. Calls himself a reverend. Runs a place out past the hills. Says he's saving kids." Callista's stomach tightened. She said nothing. "He took us in last spring. After our ma died. Said we'd have a roof, food, the Lord's word. Said we'd be part of something holy." Levi paused. His fingers clenched around the mug. "But he lied. Said we had sin inside us. That it needed to be beaten out. Work makes you clean, he'd say. Bleeding is the soul's way of crying out." He smiled when he said it. Callista's hand drifted toward her rifle out of habit. Her lips were tight. "Others," Levi continued. "Other kids. They're still there. Too scared to run. Or too broken to try. And you ran." He nodded. "Elias found a way out. Through the crawl space under the chapel. We ran for 2 nights. Thought we'd made it. Then the riders came." Callista closed her eyes. Saw the rusted chains. The blood. The fear. She opened them again. "And the town? They know." Levi's silence was answer enough. No one had lifted a finger. That night, as Callista fed kindling into the stove, a noise startled her. Not the wind. Not an animal. A soft clink like metal striking metal. She grabbed her rifle and crept to the barn's edge, lifting the curtain aside just enough to peer out. A cross stood planted in the dirt, freshly driven into the ground. Rough-hewn. Burnt around the edges. A warning. She stepped outside, scanning the darkness. No movement. No sound. But her tin cups were swinging. They'd been here. Watching. She returned to the boys and said nothing. But she doubled the traps. The next morning, she went to town again. This time, she walked into the church. The sanctuary was empty, pews lit by dusty light filtering through stained glass. A thin layer of dust covered the altar. Yet behind the silence, Callista felt something wrong. Something heavy, like the memory of a scream still echoing off stone. She stood for a long moment at the pulpit, staring at the crooked cross on the wall. Behind her, a voice spoke. "You always were stubborn." Callista turned slowly. Sheriff Anders leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "No hat. No pretense. Last I checked," she said evenly, "church was open to all." He chuckled, low and mean. "Sure it is. Especially for lost souls." Callista stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Is that what you think I am?" He didn't answer. Just said, "I heard someone's been poking around where they shouldn't." "Then you heard wrong. I also heard you picked up strays." Callista's hand tightened at her side. "If I did, I'd say that's my business." Anders took a slow step inside. "Funny thing, though. When folks interfere with the Reverend's work, bad things tend to happen." Callista's eyes narrowed. "The Reverend's work? Saving souls. Cleansing corruption. That's what he does. What you're doing, now that's something else. That's harboring." She let silence stretch between them, cold and taut. Then she said, "If Silas Morrow wants something from me, he can come himself." Anders grinned. "Maybe he will." Then he left, the door swinging shut behind him. That night, Callista didn't sleep at all. She sat with the rifle across her knees, watching the moon rise. Elias was stronger now, speaking in whispers. He didn't ask questions about the cross outside. Neither did Levi. Callista had no answers for them. But as dawn broke over the distant ridge, she made a choice. She would not run. She would not yield. Whoever came next would find her waiting. And if the wolves were in the walls, she'd set fire to the whole house before she let them take another soul. It began with the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, and too many to count. The prairie didn't carry echoes like the mountains did, but this sound still crawled up Callista's spine like an omen. Morning sunlight had just begun to warm the frost from the grass when the riders appeared on the ridge. 7 of them. They wore plain clothes, drab coats, dust-covered trousers, wide-brimmed hats pulled low. At first glance, they could have passed for ranch hands or cowherds. But they rode in perfect formation, silent and tight, like men trained for war. And at their center was a figure in white. Callista lowered the spyglass and stepped down from the barn roof. "They're here," she said. Levi tensed. Elias, sitting up with a blanket around his shoulders, didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between the brothers said enough. Callista packed quickly. Not to flee, but to prepare. She moved through the barn with mechanical precision, loading rounds, hiding supplies, checking snares along the outer fence. Her fingers were steady, but her heart beat a war drum against her ribs. She hadn't expected this so soon. Had hoped for more time. One more day to plan, to fortify. But time wasn't generous to people like her. At the base of the hill, the riders halted. The man in white dismounted. His coat was long and spotless, save for a crimson cross stitched into the breast. His face was clean-shaven, unnervingly smooth. His eyes pale, almost clear. There was no warmth in them, only calculation. He walked forward, hands visible, as though greeting a parishioner. But Callista felt no peace. "Mrs. Whitlock," he called, voice carrying like a sermon. "I come with no quarrel." She stepped from the barn, rifle cradled in her arms. "You always open conversations with the cavalry?" He smiled. "Only when kindness has failed." She said nothing. "I am Reverend Morrow. I believe you're harboring 2 young men under my care. They fled from my mission some days ago. I've come to return them. That is all." "They're not yours to return," Callista replied, even and cold. "They're not property." The smile didn't falter. "You misunderstand, ma'am. We don't chain children for punishment. We chain them for their own good. Restraint is a form of redemption." She felt Levi's presence behind her, quiet and shaking. "You beat them," she said flatly. "Starved them. You left them to die in the woods. Correction, Moro said softly. We left them in the Lord's hands. He tests those he intends to purify. You're a butcher with a Bible, Callista spat. Now the smile faded. Moro looked past her, toward the barn. Their mother brought them to me herself. She wanted them saved from sin. She wanted them made right. I honored her wishes. Callista stepped forward. And where is she now? Moro's eyes hardened. The Lord called her home. A pause hung in the air, heavy as thunder. You're not taking them, Callista said. Moro exhaled, as if disappointed. You're a widow, Mrs. Whitlock. You have no kin. No law to shield you. Why die for children who don't belong to you? Callista raised her rifle. Because someone has to. For a long moment, Moro didn't move. Then he turned to his men and raised a hand. No signal. No shout. Just one calm gesture. The riders dismounted. Callista backed toward the barn, slamming the door shut behind her. Get to the loft, she said to Levi and Elias. Stay down. No matter what you hear. Elias tried to speak, but she silenced him with a look. Levi nodded, pulling his brother toward the ladder. Callista loaded shells with methodical grace. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had 30 rounds and 2 pistols stashed by the doorway. Enough to buy time. Not enough to win. The first shot came fast, a bullet splintering the barn's outer wall. Callista ducked and returned fire, striking a man square in the shoulder. He dropped behind a trough with a curse. Another came from the left. She rolled and fired again, this time grazing his leg. The shot drove him back, but it cost her her cover. A round exploded near her boot, sending dirt and debris into the air. She's alone, one of them shouted. Then finish her, Moro's voice rang. The barn rattled with lead. Callista crawled low, ducking behind barrels, firing only when she could see eyes. She didn't aim to kill. She aimed to protect. Every bullet she fired bought seconds. Every second kept the boys alive. Then, silence. Smoke drifted in the air. The wind shifted. And a voice called out from beyond the shattered boards. You've got heart, Mrs. Whitlock, Moro said. But righteousness doesn't come from defiance. It comes from obedience. She looked down. Blood soaked through her sleeve. A graze, deep but clean. Then, the faintest sound, a creak above her. The loft. Her eyes widened. No. Too late. A shot rang out from above. Elias. He'd fired her spare pistol, hands trembling, eyes wide with terror. One of the riders went down screaming. The others turned. Up top. Callista rose and screamed, and oh! But the world exploded again. Gunfire erupted from all directions. In the chaos, Callista dove forward and tackled the man nearest the loft. Her rifle cracked against his jaw. He collapsed. She grabbed his pistol and fired upward, not at her boys, but at the supports. The loft trembled. Boards snapped. And the whole upper structure came crashing down in a cloud of hay and dust, cutting off the attacker's line of fire. Silence. Then coughing. Groaning. Callista rose slowly, bleeding, battered, half-deaf. The barn was a ruin, but it still stood. Elias lay half-buried in straw, dazed but alive. Levi crawled toward him, shielding his brother with his body. And from the threshold, Moro stepped in, unarmed, his coat torn but his composure intact. You've chosen poorly, he whispered. Callista leveled the stolen pistol at his heart. I've chosen finally. He took another step. I've seen what lies at the end of sin, Mrs. Whitlock. I've watched men burn. I've helped them burn. There is no mercy for those who resist the call. You're right, she said, and pulled the trigger. The hammer snapped forward on an empty chamber. Moro smiled. But Callista was already moving. She lunged, driving the pistols but into his throat. He stumbled back, choking. She struck again, once, twice, until he fell. Outside, the last rider fled, his courage spent, his loyalty shattered. Callista stood over the Reverend, breathing hard. She didn't kill him. She didn't need to. He'd be dragged into town, bloodied and bruised. His truth exposed by two brothers who would no longer be silent. The town would listen now. Because they'd seen what she saw, blood on the Bible's spine, rot under its pages. She turned to the boys, both staring at her like she'd split the earth. Callista sank to her knees. "It's over," she said. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Not really. This land didn't forget. And neither did men like Morrow. But for the first time in a long time, Callista Whitlock wasn't alone. And neither were they. The trial took place under the open sky, because the church doors had been locked and no one in Cedar Hollow dared reopen them just yet. Reverend Morrow sat shackled in the center of the square, his white coat stained with the truth. The people, once blind and comfortably deaf, had come to stare, not in reverence but in disbelief. Some still clung to doubt like a worn-out prayer. Others looked at Callista Whitlock as though they were seeing her for the first time. And maybe they were. Sheriff Anders was gone. Disgraced. He'd ridden off the morning after Morrow's capture with a saddlebag full of guilt and no word left in his mouth. The new deputy, young and green, stood beside Callista now with a hand on his holster and a look in his eyes like he didn't want to blink. The judge, brought in from Elder's Ridge, had asked for testimony. What he got instead was a reckoning. Callista stood tall beneath the noonday sun, her voice flat but resolute. She did not embellish. She did not weep. She told them about the chains, the boys, the barn, the cross. Every word she gave carved the lie from Morrow's flesh. Elias sat beside Levi on a wooden bench, hands folded in his lap, still thin but whole again. When he stood to speak, his voice broke once, then held. "We weren't sinners," he said. "We were just children." The crowd murmured. Shame thickened the air. Later, when the judge asked Callista why she had done it, why she'd risked her life, her land, everything for two boys not her own, she said, "Because I was them once. Alone. Waiting. Hoping someone would come." The judge gave her a long look, then nodded. Morrow didn't speak a word. He didn't need to. His silence had become its own indictment. They sentenced him to hang. The gallows went up 2 days later. But Callista wasn't there to watch. She'd seen enough dying. Instead, she was in her field, mending a broken fence post, when the bell in town rang once, sharp and final. Levi heard it too. He paused from chopping wood, looked out across the pasture, and said nothing. Callista met his gaze. No words were needed. By week's end, rumors rolled through Cedar Hollow like thunder. Some folks said Callista had consorted with outlaws. Others claimed she'd stolen the boys for ransom. But the louder voices, the truer ones, called her something else. The widow who stood her ground. She didn't take to that title. Never wanted one. But she couldn't deny the shift. Folks who once crossed the street to avoid her now met her eyes. A few even tipped their hats. She still didn't go to church. She liked the open sky better. The boys stayed. There was never really a conversation about it. One morning, Callista made 3 plates of cornbread instead of 2, and that was that. Levi began repairing the barn with nails and patience. Elias read every book she had, even the water-stained ones. He asked about stars, maps, and whether the ocean tasted like salt in every part of the world. They were healing, all of them. But healing wasn't quiet. It came with nights full of screams, hands flinching at sudden sounds, the weight of memories crawling through cracks in the floorboards. Sometimes, Callista would sit on the porch long after dusk, watching the horizon like it owed her something. "You think it ever ends?" Levi asked once, joining her with 2 mugs of coffee. She took one sip. "No. But it gets easier to carry." He nodded. "Feels like we're starting over." "You are," she said. "What about you?" She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her shawl, cool and restless. "I reckon I am too," she said finally. "Just took me longer to get here." A week later, a letter came from Carson's Ridge. A man who claimed to have known the twins' mother, a cousin or something close enough. He wrote stiff words, full of apologies and offers. "I'll take them in if you're willing to let them go. Promises of work, of decency, of proper guardianship. Callista didn't show the boys the letter until the morning after. They read it in silence. Levi folded the paper carefully, like it might crack in his hands. "You want us to go?" he asked. "That ain't the question," Callista said. "The question is, do you want to?" Elias shook his head fast, eyes wide. Levi hesitated. He looked at the barn, the field, the mule chewing near the fence line. He looked at Callista, whose face was weathered but strong, and whose hands had done more for him than anyone since his mother died. "No," he said. "I think this is where we're supposed to be." Callista didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped just enough to say everything. That night they ate by lantern light. Elias told a joke so bad it made Levi laugh hard enough to spill beans down his shirt. Callista rolled her eyes, muttered something about boys without manners, but her lips twitched at the corners. Outside, the wind had calmed. The prairie held its breath, as if unsure whether it was watching an ending, or a beginning. Word spread beyond Cedar Hollow. People from nearby towns came through under one pretense or another, buying eggs, trading tools, asking for advice they didn't need. Some just wanted to see her, the woman who'd taken on a monster and lived. One morning, Callista found a small wooden sign nailed to her gate. Painted by hand. The Whitlock home. She didn't know who left it. She didn't take it down. Winter approached slow that year, as though the land itself wanted to give her more time. And she took it. Every morning was earned. Every scar told a story she didn't need to repeat. She planted, she mended, she taught Elias to write cursive and Levi to ride like a Comanche. She fought off one wolf, then another, but not all wolves came on four-legged. Some rode horses. Some quoted scripture. And some looked you in the eye while they took your soul. Callista knew that now. But she also knew this: she had not bowed. She had not bent. And she never would. Not for men. Not for fear. Not for the past. Because she'd found something worth standing for. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.